Hello, I'm Jim Spohrer, the director of IBM's Cognitive Open Technology Group, and I'm based in Silicon, California. And in non-pandemic times, I work out of the IBM Almaden Research Center in San Jose, California. Let me go ahead and share my screen. First of all, I would like to thank Fu Ren Lin for the invitation to present to the International Conference on Service Science and Innovation this year. My talk today is the future of service science in the era of AI. And any questions that you may have, if we don't get to them today, you can follow me on Twitter at Jim Spohrer and contact me there, or LinkedIn, or I'm also part of the Slack at the Linux Foundation AI. Today's talk on the future of service science in the era of AI is going to try to answer or at least formulate a perspective that allows one to approach answering a lot of different questions about service science as well as artificial intelligence. And since we have so much to cover, let's dive right in. Again, I'm Jim Spohrer. I work at IBM, but I'm also one of the founders of a field called service science, and I've won a number of awards over the years. The Gumerson Service Research Award, the Vargo and Lush Service Dominant Logic Award, the Daniel Bird Service Systems Award, and I'm also a PICMET Fellow for my work advancing the field of service science. If you look at my background, you notice that I've studied physics at MIT, I've studied artificial intelligence and cognitive science at Yale, and I've studied service systems at IBM. Each of these types of systems are very complex, very interesting, and I'm happy to share some thoughts with you today about all of these areas. You may wonder, how did somebody at IBM get interested in the topic of service? And well, the answer is simple: revenue. If you look at IBM's revenue over the years, from about the early 1990s, you can see that it became a very growing part of IBM's revenue. I joined IBM right about here, and as part of the venture capital group, there was rapid growth in our service business, so I decided to move over to IBM Research to help IBM develop service science. And for the first decade, things were going great. Then around 2011, of course, with our Watson Jeopardy, our focus shifted to artificial intelligence, which is a really, really hard problem. Nobody has solved artificial intelligence in the cloud yet, but IBM is investing heavily to figure this out. And also, some of you may have heard that recently we've decided to split IBM into two companies, because part of the service business is commoditizing, and there's certain innovation aspects to it as well, but it's as things become commodity, IBM tends to divest of them or spin them out and then focus more on the core innovation strategy. Here's the outline of my talk today, and I'll just say I'm going to set some context, then I've got a part that discusses AI, and then a part that discusses service science, and I kind of blend them together so they're not entirely separate. But I like this little cartoon. We shouldn't be exploring planets until we've solved all our problems here on Earth. And that's the old guy talking. And the young guy says, that sounds reasonable. So what's the timeline for solving all problems? 10 years, 15 years? And it's interesting to start thinking about, what does it really mean to solve problems? What does it mean to solve academic disciplines? So what's the timeline for solving all problems? So if you talk to some people in artificial intelligence is about solving problems via automation. Anything that a person can do, let's make a machine do it. You know, artificial intelligence is a pretty mature discipline. It's over 70 years old, and it studies automation and building more capabilities. AI really tries to understand intelligent things, intelligence, and that people have, and then how to make technology do that. And if you go to deepmind.com, their website even says, we aim to build advanced AI, sometimes known as artificial general intelligence, AGI, to expand our knowledge and find new answers. By solving this, we believe we could help people solve thousands of problems. So there's people in the field of artificial intelligence that believe by solving artificial intelligence, solving automation, that's going to solve lots of the world's problems. When you look at service science, though, service science is an emerging transdiscipline. It's not yet 20 years old, and it studies the special type of responsible entities in their win-win interaction with other entities that transform what we call value co-creation, capability co-evolution, elevation mechanisms that really build resilient service system entities. And service science tries to understand that evolving ecology. It's not just about a problem, it's about an ecology of responsible entities interacting, and their capabilities, their constraints, their rights and responsibilities. You can think of rights as, if you have an entity that becomes more and more capable, in part because it controls artificial intelligence, its capabilities are growing, but it's also got constraints. And in service systems, those capabilities are rights, things you're allowed to do, and the constraints are really what we impose on ourselves to be responsible, and then seeks to improve the quality of life of people, both the present people by having smarter service systems and future generations by having wiser service systems. So you'll see this concept of a service system is really central to the study of service science. And Maglio 2009 defines service systems as dynamic configurations of people, technology, organizations, and information connected internally and externally by value propositions to other service system entities. And some people prefer to call it a socio-technical system. I'm perfectly fine when people use the term socio-technical system, talking about people and technology rather than service system. However, I think socio-technical systems kind of focus on what's in the system. Oh, there's people and technology. Let's call it socio-technical. Whereas service system tends to focus on the interactions and how those interactions evolve over time as part of an ecology of entities. So I prefer service system over socio-technical system because I think it's not about just the parts, it's about the interconnections and interactions between those parts. This is another view pretty much of the same thing, but provides a little bit broader context. Every discipline, and again, service science is a transdiscipline, meaning that it pulls together many, many other disciplines. It doesn't replace computer science. It doesn't replace artificial intelligence. It doesn't replace operations research. It doesn't replace the social sciences. It doesn't replace anything. It's a transdiscipline. It's trying to make sense of how they all connect. And so it's very important to look at every discipline and say, what is the fundamental entities that that discipline studies, and what are the actions and the interactions between those entities? And so for computer science, there's hardware, there's software, there's algorithms, but we'll see that computer science is really about studying physical symbol system entities. And when we talk about chemistry, of course, atoms, molecules, states of matter, but really one of the most exciting parts of chemistry is the autocatalytic molecular system entities. And what do I mean by autocatalytic? Well, what comes out of chemistry? Biology, cells that reproduce, DNA that can make copies of itself. So biology, as you get higher and higher cognitive capabilities, at least with memory systems and ability to plan for the future in people, we're talking about biological cognitive system entities. And computer science gives rise to the discipline of artificial intelligence, where I got my PhD, and it studies intelligence, and increasingly because of deep learning, it's studying neural nets and digital cognitive system entities. Now, service science, of course, service, value co-creation, but really what we're studying is these service system entities and the ecology that they are part of. So service science studies the evolving ecology of service system entities, their capabilities, constraints, rights, and responsibilities, their value co-creation and capability co-elevation interactions, as well as the outcomes and how that affects their identities and reputations. So whenever you think of service science, don't just think of service science, a transdiscipline. Think about all of the other disciplines and the entities they're studying and how they relate to service science. So let's talk about computer science a little bit more. I love this piece by Newell and Simon. They were Turing Award winners, which is one of the highest awards you can get in computer science. In fact, arguably, Herb Simon and Alan New helped create the field of computer science. But I love what they say about computer science as the study of the phenomena surrounding computers. We build computers and programs for many reasons. We build them to serve society. And one of the fundamental contributions to knowledge of computer science has been to explain at a rather basic level what symbols are. Symbols lie at the root of intelligent action, which is, of course, the primary topic of artificial intelligence. For that matter, it is the primary question for all of computer science, for all information is processed by computers in the service of ends. And we measure the intelligence of a system by its ability to achieve those stated ends in the face of variations, difficulties, complexities posed by the task environment. So again, if you read Newell and Simon and the early foundations of service science, they were very, very clear. What are we studying? What's the phenomena? It's these physical symbol systems that, with this goal of understanding intelligence. Now, Brian Arthur is an economist and a colleague of mine, and he wrote a piece recently that I think gets to the heart of the matter for many people when they hear about artificial intelligence and automation and worrying about jobs. But I think an economist has a slightly different take on it, and he talks about the Keynes point. And the Keynes point is, well, let me just read this. The term technological unemployment is from John Maynard Keynes' 1930 lecture, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he predicted that in the future, around 2030, the production problem would be solved. So here we are in 2020, and AI is getting more and more advanced. And we've just heard about, some things about automation. And what Keynes was talking about in this paper is there would be enough for everyone, but machines, robots, he thought, would cause technological unemployment. There would be plenty to go around, but the means of getting it, how do you get a share of it in jobs, might be scarce. We're not quite at 2030, Brian Arthur says, but I believe we have reached the Keynes point where indeed enough is produced by the economy, both physical and virtual, for all of us. With total U.S. household income of 8,000 income shared by Americans with 116 million households, each would earn 73,000, enough for a decent middle class income. So basically, you take this $1 trillion American income, you divide it up between 116 million households, and you get 73,000. Which is a pretty decent middle class income. That's what Brian Arthur said. Sorry, I stumbled in the middle. I've obviously got a typo. And we have reached a point where technological unemployment is becoming a reality. The problem in this new phase we've entered is not quite jobs, it is access to what is produced. Jobs have been the main means of access for 200 to 300 years. Before that, farm labor, small craft workshops, voluntary piecework, or inherited wealth provided access. Now, access needs to change again. So get this focus on access. Production solved, access challenging. Used to be access was jobs, but well, maybe there aren't as many jobs because of automation. However this happens, we've entered a new, different phase for the economy, a new era where production matters less, and what matters is access to production, distribution of in other words, who gets what and how they get it. We've entered the distributed era. So I put these two pieces here in juxtaposition, computer science and economics, to show you how, service science is a transdiscipline. The advances in technology like artificial intelligence certainly impact how we formulate frameworks in service science, but also economics impacts service science, and even more disciplines, of course, impact service science. to this point about artificial intelligence and this Keynes point, not very recently, in fact, on the Bloomberg's Intelligence Squared, That's Debatable, there were a panel debating, is it time to redistribute wealth? And we used our Watson AI technology to gather arguments from 3,500 people, and Watson analyzed those arguments and gave a summary of here are the pro and here are the con arguments. And this is a new AI capability that IBM is developing in order to crowdsource and to provide summaries of debatable topics. Now, back to service science. What is service science? This diagram is probably the best one diagram summary of service science that at least Paul Maglio and I've been able to create. And this particular diagram comes from a paper I wrote in 2011 on looking at Barga and Lush's concept of generic actors in markets. Is it all B2B and beyond in industrial marketing management? And you can see that service science is in some ways the closest discipline is ecology. And I'm not just talking about environmental ecology, I'm talking about populations of entities. And these entities, of course, are service systems. And what is a service system? Well, you're a service system. So people are service systems, businesses are service systems, universities are service systems, all types of socio-technical systems are service systems. And they interact in networks that link, nest, merge, divide, all of these kinds of interactions in service networks. And then there are outcomes, changes in value, both beneficial and non-beneficial. And you can think of these entities as having identities, right? You know, IBM has an identity. The United States of America has an identity. Jim Spohrer, I have an identity. So all of these different, MIT, an identity. So you can think of all of these socio-technical systems, these service system entities as having identity, and they interact and they produce outcomes, and those outcomes affect their reputation. And the types of interactions that we study in service science are value proposition based and governance mechanisms based. And what's the difference? Well, value propositions are about access rights, which relates to what we were just hearing from Brian Arthur. And it's about resources, access right to resources. And we have various measures like quality, productivity, compliance, sustainable innovation. And there's stakeholders. There's a customer, there's a provider, there's government entities, there's competitors. All of these different stakeholders affect how you can create viable value propositions. Governance mechanisms are just value propositions. However, they're the institutional rules and constraints and incentives and penalties and risks. And, you know, governments, you know, we've evolved to give governments coercive right. You know, don't pay your taxes, go to jail, commit a horrendous crime, you know, face imprisonment. So governance mechanisms are value propositions where you carry a big stick, and you've reserved those primarily for governments. And the one thing that I would probably change about, you know, this diagram, you can see the outcomes. There's, you know, 4 possibilities: win-win, lose-lose, lose-win, win-lose, depending on how the entities are interacting. And with our ISPAR model, we break that into a larger set of outcome possibilities. But the one thing I would probably change is put more in here about responsibility, because it really is your a positive reputation is for those who take risk and responsibility very, very seriously. And there's a lot of research that needs to be done in that area to refine service science to look at responsibility. And this is very, very important in the AI era, where our capabilities increase, but we have to use those capabilities responsibly. I'm not going to go through, I have some slides in here on service dominant logic, service science, various publications looking at these service system entity views from all of this. I'll just post this presentation to the web, and you'll be able to look through those. And of course, there's recent publications in the service research literature on artificial intelligence. I really recommend not only these two, but there's many, many others that are starting to appear. And when we think about the roadmap to the future of service science, I want you to think about how we organize and what's changing and what's constant. So even in the hunter-gatherer and the agricultural era, when the basic service system was the family and the clan, pretty local structures, it paid to be a generalist. I mean, if you think about, knowing how to start a fire, knowing how to make a tool, hunter-gatherer era, or knowing how to build the tools needed on a farm, a pioneer farm. Think of a pioneer going in a wagon train out west and having to build a log cabin. These people knew how to do lots of things. They were generalists, and to survive and act in those service systems of those times, you really needed to have a lot of very, very basic knowledge. But still, the constant was competing for collaborators, and success was really about competing for collaborators. In the manufacturing era, in the human service era that we're in now, a lot of the focus is on businesses, service systems, and nations. And we prize ourselves for our knowledge depth. Are you a computer scientist? Are you an economist? So we've gone from where people knew a lot of general knowledge and could live fairly independently to where people have a lot of specialized knowledge and go really, really deep. But still, your success is how you compete for collaborators. So that's the constant. And now we're entering the AI era, service in the AI era. I think, with COVID, we've seen families coming back together, people living, under the same roof again, as we try to limit our physical contact with others. People are working from home; they're not going into the office, and so the family is becoming more important service system again. How you use your house, how you use the resources in your house, and spaces in your house. When you have 4 people working in your house, how do you use the spaces? But we're cyber global. You think about Zoom, you think about Facebook and Twitter and social media and LinkedIn, and so a lot of our daily interactions with people are in our family or in our close social network and community, our clan, and then we're all connected into the cyber global infrastructure. And so to be successful, an individual, a generalist, yes, that was in the hunter-gatherer agricultural, specialist, that was manufacturing and human service period. But today it's about T-shapes. It's about having depth and breadth and being an adaptive innovator. And you're going to see that AI is only accelerating this. But the one constant is to be successful, to be ambitious and be successful, I should say, it's about competing for collaborators. What is marketing but competing for collaborators? And more in a platform economy, it's you're competing for collaborators who will build on your platform. So definitely we've entered a new era, and this roadmap to the future of service science kind of indicates some of the trends that we're starting to see. Now, let's shift more to artificial intelligence, and I'll go through this pretty quickly, but there's a set of questions that I think are really important to answer about artificial intelligence, so I'll provide perspective on that. What is the timeline for solving artificial intelligence and intelligence augmentation? Very important question. When can a CEO or anyone buy an AI capability X for a price Y? That's the question every CEO wants to know the answer to over the next 10 years to be successful. Who are the leaders driving AI progress? What will the biggest benefits from AI be? What are the biggest risks associated with AI, and are they real? What other technologies may have a bigger impact than AI? And there's several, at least 4. What are the implications for stakeholders, and how should we prepare to get the benefits and avoid the risks? So a lot of investment going into artificial intelligence. IBM signed a 10-year agreement with MIT for $240 million to advance the mission of AI. And for people who would like to know more about AI, And the answers to these questions I just surveyed. I urge you to read The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingo. It's very good. It's accessible to C-level executives, and I think it's really, really well written and talks about the 5 different tribes of learning and gives you a really good perspective on the future of artificial intelligence, I think. This is Dharmendra Modi. He's an IBM fellow working at the Almaden Research Center. He's working on something called the neuromorphic brain chip. Now, the brain chip, and it's been published about in Science Magazine, is really about getting the energy level needed to do artificial intelligence low. Why do you have to worry about low energy artificial intelligence? Well, in the end, that's the key. We're also making heavy investments in quantum computing as another way to get certain types of AI workloads to happen exponentially faster than they happen today. And clearly, there's been a lot of advances in artificial intelligence. You know, for example, image capturing has made rapid advancements, and you can see, you know, man in black shirt playing guitar, construction worker in orange safety vest working in the road. I mean, this is pretty remarkable, and it requires tremendous amounts of training data. However, as remarkable as AI has become, take a look at this. What is this? You and I know this is a fur-covered tea saucer and spoon. However, when this was first shown to one of these AI systems, it's very, very good at recognizing images. It said it was a teddy bear, and we know it's not a teddy bear. So, as advanced as AI has become, there's still a long way to go to get to artificial general intelligence. In fact, we can think about artificial intelligence as divided into 3 sections. We're in the era of narrow AI right now. If you have enough training data, you can build a pretty good AI for a narrow task. We're just beginning to enter the era of AI where you can get a model that can do multiple tasks. Think about people, although we do many, many different tasks. We have breadth and depth. And general AI, of course, is 2050 and beyond, decades away. Now, this is the largest supercomputer in the world. It was built by IBM for the Oak Ridge National Labs. It's called Summit. And it can perform 200 petaflops. That's 200 million billion instructions per second. 200 million billion instructions per second. It's pretty big, as you can see. And it runs on 13 megawatts of power. So this is an AI supercomputer, largest in the world. Now, let's compare that to your human brain, my human brain. Okay, so we can do an exascale. That's a billion instructions per second by the best estimates, and we run at 20 watts. So you can see we've got all, just based on computation, you know, our brains are doing 5 times more computation than Summit, the largest supercomputer in the world, operating at, you know, hundreds of thousands of times less energy than conventional technology. So to get to AGI, where, you know, you can do an exascale for $1,000, it's going to take some time. How long? Well, we'll get to that. And here's a very short timeline for artificial intelligence. Even in the 1950s, you can think of calculations. Computers, early computers could do calculations much faster than people and more accurately. So that was superhuman capability. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue could play chess better than anybody. 2011, Jeopardy better. You know, Go, poker, Google work. So you can think about artificial intelligence as trying to take tasks that people can do and find a way to do them at superhuman capabilities. There are, you know, systems now that are approaching human level performance, which is about 5% error rate. You know, speech recognition, image recognition, language translation, even driverless vehicles under certain contexts, when you have enough data, can perform, you know, at human level. Not perfect, there's an error rate, but they are increasingly, the more data they can give them, the better the models are. They are starting to move into the superhuman range. But there's so many things that technology still can't perform like people. You know, chatbots are not the kind of natural language, fluent conversation that we're having. Video understanding, not there yet. No system, Siri, Alexa, Watson. No artificial intelligence has a human-like memory that can do generalizations and answer questions based on our memory of episodes in our past. And no system has common sense reasoning yet. There's progress on all of these things, but not there yet. And so when we think about, and this is my version of Moore's law, when we think about getting to the point where you could have an exascale for $1,000, we can see that's about 2060. So by about 2060, that's about the time when we could start imagining approaching artificial general intelligence, just purely from a computing cost perspective. And this version of Moore's law, we start at 1960, the timeline along the bottom, we go out to 2080, and we have a $1, $1,000, $1,000,000, $1 billion, $1 trillion. This is cost, and this is time. And getting back to the CEO's question, when can I buy a capability at a particular price point? Well, you can see to the left of 2020, this is history. We know this has happened. In the 1960s, we could do 1,000 instructions per second at $1,000. In the 1990s, 1,000,000 instructions per second. In 2000s, we were approaching 1 billion instructions per second at $1,000. Today, 2020, we can do 1,000,000 instructions per second at $1,000. Petascale is still at the supercomputer cost level, but by 2040, that should be down here. And you can see the cost of a digital worker is going to go down as we have more capability. And what is a digital worker? Well, look at your smartphone, right? We all have smartphones, most of us anyway, and we've got hundreds of apps on our smartphone. And as those apps grow up, they will become digital workers. So you've got apps for entertainment, you've got apps for finance, education, healthcare, all of these different apps on your phone. Imagine being able to have a fluent conversation with them. Imagine they have an episodic memory, a human-like episodic memory, so they can remember all the interactions they've had with you. Then they start becoming like digital workers. And you can see the cost of a digital worker goes down. And this, of course, what leads to the fear, because here's a person's average annual salary, and you can see the cost of a digital worker coming down. But of course, if you're an entrepreneur or you're CEO, you're thinking, oh, GDP per employee, or revenues per employee, or profits per employee, and oh, I'm excited as an entrepreneur or CEO because as I get more digital workers, each of my human employees, I'm going to expect 10, 50, 100 times more from them because they're going to have digital workers working for them. So this is a view just purely based on computing power and based on what's happened in the past. Of course, nobody can guarantee that we're going to continue Moore's law in the future, but if we do, this is a pretty reasonable prediction about when we might get to artificial general intelligence. There's another converging piece of evidence that we have about how do we get to artificial general intelligence. This is based on some of the open source leaderboard work. And if you don't know what a leaderboard is, talk to any gamer, any kid that likes to play online games, and they'll tell you a leaderboard is just a ranking of who's best. So for AI and AI models, there's leaderboards. You can see who's best at pattern recognition for speech, image, language translation, video understanding. And you can see these are all about perceiving the world. And we're getting pretty good, and some of these over here on the left are even getting superhuman. But when it comes to developing cognition, yeah, sure, there's memory of like everything that's in a textbook, declarative memory. But what about memory that is dynamic, about your experiences of past that can do generalizations? Not there yet. And certain types of reasoning, deduction. Okay, yeah, we can do, computers are very, very good at doing certain types of deduction, but what about common sense reasoning? No, we're not there yet. So we haven't really gotten systems to develop, human-like cognition very well, although we're making progress. And building relationships, social interactions, fluent conversation, not there yet. And ultimately having assistants and collaborators where they can fill roles in society, become a coach or a mediator. And what do I mean by mediator? A mediator is a system that you trust to make certain decisions on your behalf. And so we track all of these different leaderboards, and there's actually hundreds. I'm just showing you a few here. We can see that over here, very good performance. Over here, very bad performance. So every year, if you look at the leaderboard and you see the amount of progress, how fast are we improving in these areas, that also gives you a sense of, if we're making 10% progress per year, or 5% progress per year, or 3% progress per year, when we might be able to get to artificial general intelligence. And based on these leaderboard progress, it looks like around 2040 we get to some of the first early cognitive mediators that will be helping us. And there's a great website called paperswithcode.com where you can look at the state of the art. If you want one website to go to be able to track these papers and leaderboards, I recommend Papers with Code. Now, who's winning? This red line is China. In scientific publications, China dominates. This is the US, this is Europe and Japan. So China's winning in scientific publications when it comes to artificial intelligence in top journals. The big three companies, Microsoft has the most scientific publications. Google has caught up now and passed. This was 2016, this Technology Review article. Google and DeepMind, I was looking at the last scientific conference, and I think it was Google had like 180 or 160 publications from Google and DeepMind, and down the list was, MIT I think was second, and then you get Stanford, Berkeley, and then you get some companies like IBM and Microsoft. But at the time this data was collected, Google was catching up, and now it's of course past Microsoft, but IBM is solidly in third place. But when you look at patents, IBM dominates. IBM's been number one in patents 28 years in a row. So quite a bit of different ways of looking at who's winning. You should also look at robots by country. South Korea has the most industrial robots by country. And also there's some really interesting stuff I don't have time to get into today about your national social policy and how easy it will be for certain countries to switch into an AI-driven economy. Accenture has some nice work on this as well. Really worth taking a look at these. And what has been the impact of COVID? Well, COVID is accelerating all this. As you try to get away from physical human-to-human contact, robots become more important. So there's a whole set of material here on robots in retail advancing rapidly. Some people say they're going to take away jobs. I'm not so sure about that, but that's one of the arguments. And then this is an article about telepresence robots. Telepresence robots are robots that require people, but they're remotely operating the robots. And there's a lot of different startups and other companies producing telepresence robots. Some people are saying this is going to add jobs because people will be able to be controlling these robots telerobotically. And then there's some great articles here about robots at home, and people say this may reduce the need for a job, because if you can think about all of the things that you need people to come to your house, do the yard work, do maintenance and repair on the house, do the cooking, the cleaning. As we get more robots at home, that's going to reduce the cost that families have to put out to external people coming into the home to provide services. There's even a robot called Farmbot that you can set up in your front yard or your backyard. It's like a 3D printer, and it grows your vegetables, and it can pull out weeds, it can water the plants, it can tell whether the plants are healthy, it can plant the seeds. So increasingly, as we get more robots at home, that could reduce the cost of needing external jobs. The benefits of AI are going to be access to expertise. We're going to have insanely great labor productivity from these trusted service providers who are able to provide us digital workers for healthcare, education, and finance. We're going to make much better choices, insanely great collaboration with others on what matters most via augmented intelligence. And the risks, some people worry about job loss and superintelligence. I'm not so worried about those. I'm more worried about de-skilling and bad actors, because those are real today. De-skilling is if we become overly reliant on our AI, that's not good. And bad actors can use the AI capabilities today for great mischief, and they already are. Anybody that works on, looks in social media, and there's bots out there that are, doing all kinds of mischief and harm. Other technologies are going to have a bigger impact than artificial intelligence, for sure. Augmented reality and virtual reality, as people are staying at home, there's been a huge spike in the game world. The game worlds are growing up, just like our apps will grow up and be digital workers. Game worlds are going to grow up and become these cyber global things. You know, Facebook grows up, Twitter grows up. All of these things are leading towards these cyber worlds that people will spend a great deal of time in. And there'll be ways to benefit from participation in these augmented reality and virtual reality worlds. Especially, COVID has accelerated this as you try to get away from direct human-to-human contact. Trust is going to be so important in the future. So blockchain, security systems, these are going to have a huge impact on our life as we finally get to systems that we're going to be able to trust and have an infrastructure that we trust. Advances in material and energy systems will also have a huge impact as cheaper manufacturing brings things local. Recycling is going to go to new levels as well. And I didn't put it on the slide here, but I usually ask in person, what's the other one? Of course, bioscience research is going to have, life science research is going to have a huge impact on our quality of life over the next 10 to 20 years. Now, the interesting thing is AI is going to accelerate all of these things. But these are poised to have a huge impact on our quality of life, and therefore relevant to service science, which ultimately is about the people and technology in these socio-technical systems and how we interact to co-create value and to co-elevate our capabilities. In fact, the best way to predict this future is to inspire the next generation of students or talents to build it better. We can see in about 20 years, transportation, cars drive themselves. 20 years, no water shortages. Singapore already recycles 99% of its water. Manufacturing, local, thanks to robotics, 3D printing. Energy, no energy shortages, thanks to the artificial leaf, geothermal, and even small-scale nuclear. Construction, amazing. If you haven't seen it, the Broad Group can build a 30-story building in 15 days. Their CEO aspires to build Sky City, the tallest building in the world, in 5 days. They're looking at robotically recycling buildings too when they reach the end of their life. I mean, these new buildings are not only faster to build, they're more energy efficient, they're using the latest materials, they're safer, more earthquake resistant. The construction dramatically changed. Information and communication technology. Well, I've just shared with you the advances in artificial intelligence. By 2040, by 2060, by 2080, we will have, each of us will have eventually 100 digital workers working for us. Great if you're an entrepreneur. Retail goes social. Finance grows crowdfunded. Healthcare, all robotic surgery, 3D printed organs. Education, even kids will have these super smartphones, being able to make discoveries, work in teams to improve their local communities and innovate. And even government, I know it's hard to believe, but even government is better in 20 years. And if I had time, I'd go into that. I just want to make a point about, entrepreneurship. Farmers, you can think of even 200 years ago, were somewhat like entrepreneurs. They were biological entrepreneurs. The number of trees, the number of cattle, the number of sheep they had was somewhat a measure of their affluence. And in the future, as we enter these cyber global worlds, the number of digital workers that you have working for you are going to be a measure of your prosperity. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting, shift back to the family and not in clans. A local community is a clan, so the family clan, but these cyber global virtual worlds are going to be one of the big areas for exploration in service science in the future as we think about value co-creation and capability co-elevating mechanisms in the future. Here's a little bit about the artificial leaf being worked on by MIT and Harvard and Caltech. This is food from air. This is VTT in Finland, very impressive, already being used to convert carbon dioxide out of the air into proteins, which can be fed to cattle. And imagine your 3D printed, nice juicy hamburger where a cow wasn't killed in order to create it. So this will impact both climate change as well as more humane systems that don't require killing animals for protein. As I get older, I want my exoskeleton. These are advances in energy and materials. Think of how many elderly people fall over, break a bone, takes long to heal, they get isolated, they lose their will to live. So exoskeletons are going to be very important for improving quality of life of elderly people as we get into the future. And that's based on material science and energy science. So we can see there's a lot of innovations coming. The socio-technical systems are going to get smarter, but can we make them wiser? And this is what service science studies. And just to wrap up, these are the icons of progress in artificial intelligence. And I usually just include this to, mention that, artificial intelligence is only about less than 70 years old by some measure. 64 years old to be exact. I was born in 1956. IBM was there at the beginning. Nathan Rochester from IBM was at this very first Dartmouth conference. This is the proposal from 1955 when the idea of the conference was conceived. And just to keep adding to this notion that AI is getting better, this is Professor Arai. She builds a Todai robot that can take the Tokyo University entrance exam. It can take the exam and scores better than 70% of the students that take the exam. The Todai robot can do better than that. And someday your smartphone will be able to take the entrance exam of any university and pass it. So how do we prepare for this? So I was conceived in 1955, born in 1956. That was the party line telephone on the farmhouse in Maine that I grew up in. When I got to MIT, this was the rotary phone in my dorm room. When I got to Silicon Valley, this is my first Nokia phone. Today, of course, I have a smartphone. What might I have by 2035? What might I have in 2055 when the apps on my phone grow up and become digital workers? And this is my first program I wrote on punch cards in 1972. And when I was leading IBM's global university programs, we, of course, made our Watson in the Cloud available to 300,000 faculty and students around the world. So the building blocks are getting better. I talk about building blocks. You can see these Lego building blocks. Now you can go out and buy the robot-controlled 3D printer Lego kit. So the building blocks are certainly getting better. And I think about that in terms of, here's my programming building blocks in 1972, but how are the building blocks getting better today? And Wendy Murphy sent me this picture of her dog in 2016. I thought, what a cute dog she has. And then I thought, oh, in 2016, this would be hard for an AI system to recognize. So I uploaded it to the Microsoft Caption Bot on June 19th, 2016. That I'm not really confident, but I think it's a couple of brown bears standing next to a cat. I laughed so hard. Then I sent it out to all my friends, including colleagues I knew at Microsoft and Google and IBM, of course, and all the people working on image recognition systems saying, hey, we've got a long way to go. And I gave them 0 stars. You did terrible. But the next day I thought, wait a minute, I just gave Microsoft data. I wonder. So I uploaded the exact same image one day later, and it said, I think it's a close-up of a cat looking at a dog. Now that's wrong, but it's much, much better. And so we're in an era where the building blocks are getting better on a 24-hour basis if they have the data. How did IBM do back in 2016? We got it right, but we're kind of boring. Animal 100%, mammal 100%, dog 82%. I gave a talk on November 10th, 2017, and just for fun, I decided I would upload the image again. Microsoft got it perfect. I think it's a brown and white dog looking at the camera. I gave them 5 stars. IBM, how did we do? Well, remember that super intelligence? Did you know that it's a Welsh Corgi? I didn't, but IBM is predicting it's a Welsh Corgi. So as you think about your life and the life of a person, it takes about 10 million minutes to become an adult, to get to about 18 or 20 years old in our society. From a baby to a toddler, to a young child, to an adolescent, to someone who's ready to go to college or in college. It's about 10 million minutes of experience. But even if we could capture all of that data, everything that a single individual hears or sees or does, there's all of what the body is doing and the feeling, the internal sensations, and all our internal thoughts on the neural networks. So how could we possibly collect all that data about what's going on inside our bodies and inside our brain in order to have the training set to build an artificial and general intelligence from, 10 million minutes of experience. But let's imagine we figure that out. And so we've got an adolescent, AGI, or a young adult AGI, a digital worker. It's then 2 million minutes of experience to train them up on to become an expert, like a pilot or a medical technician or a dancer. It's about 2 million minutes more experience. So these are some of the problems that have to be solved. In addition to getting the computing power at the low enough energy, we have to be able to build the data sets for the systems that generate the data automatically, maybe in virtual worlds, to create these systems so we can get access not only to the external stimulus, but the internal types of stimulus if we're going to be able to approach building AGI. And anybody familiar with the work on GANs, generative adversarial networks, knows that's the approach that's being taken, automatically generating things in simulated worlds to build robots that can walk and do fluid movements. And once we have these digital workers, then we can augment, accountants don't go away, doctors don't go away, zoologists don't go away, people don't go away, but we're augmented now. We have better tools for becoming more productive. Biomedical engineers, have to read constantly. There's so much new knowledge coming in about biomedical engineering. If we're not augmented, if we don't have digital workers scanning all of the literature in Chinese, German, how can we know what the advances are? How can we be the best biochemical engineer when we don't even have know what we should be reading that's most relevant to the particular work that we're doing? And IBM has done some work with folks at Baylor College showing a dramatic increase in the productivity to discover cancer-fighting molecules. So this is the power of AI when it's applied as augmented intelligence to boost the productivity of people in their professions. And of course, things are moving to open source. Software is eating the world, but open source is eating software. My day job at IBM these days is working in open source artificial intelligence. And eventually we have models that have these capabilities we've been describing. And the best way to prepare is to get a GitHub account. GitHub is where all of the open source projects are. There's a lot of AI systems out there. And you don't have to be a programmer to get a GitHub account. You don't have to be a programmer to search GitHub and find, the community that's working on programs that do automatic Chinese poetry generation. And they are looking for people to use their technology, to give them feedback, to help them create better documentation. So there's a role for everybody who gets involved in this open source world. And more, that's the democratization of all of this technology and knowledge is via open source. So definitely get your GitHub account, and that will help you prepare to get the benefits of and avoid some of the risks. At IBM, more than just the precision of the model, we want to be able to trust our AI systems. So did anybody tamper with it? Is it fair? Is it easy to understand? Is it accountable? All of these things we're building into our IBM products. This is a version of our OpenScale product. But more than that, we're also making all of these fairness and trusted AI tools open source. And in fact, our vision for the trusted AI is robustness, fairness, explainability, and lineage. And we've made at least 3 of these open source projects part of the Linux Foundation AI. So, IBM created them, but we transferred the ownership over to the Linux Foundation AI. So it can be multi-vendor, true open governance of this very, very important technology. Of course, others, Google are working on, explainability with their Lucid systems and Clever Hans. Microsoft has offerings as well. But I think what differentiates IBM is we're the first to move it into open governance. So yes, we have transferred it. It's not just open source, so people can access it. All of the trademarks, all of the governance of it is true multi-vendor open governance in a foundation. And there's 300 different open source data and AI projects that we're currently tracking in the Linux Foundation. I was recently elected the Technical Advisory Council chairperson of the Linux Foundation AI, and we're constantly adding new open source AI projects. We also have programs to encourage developers to develop systems, $100,000 prizes. CODE is our Center for Open Data and AI Technologies. And in conclusion, I would just like to wrap up by saying, the situation is we have these platforms and ecosystems for people building data and AI workloads, but AI is very hard. It's going to take decades to solve there. Industry is in this open source collaboration competition mode. Learn the 3 R's, read, redo, report. Everybody can learn these, and definitely check out the LFAI landscape and IBM CODE. That's an on-ramp to our Cloud Pak for data products if you're an enterprise developer working on trusted AI. And of course, we acquired Red Hat, and they have a hybrid cloud ecosystem platform for developing AI workloads on OpenShift. And just in conclusion, I'd say the one word that connects service science and open tech AI is trust. We have to be able to trust in order to do value co-creation. But we also have to have trusted AI that's ethical and safe if we're going to make advances into this new era. And of course, things can go wrong. So I urge you to think about the resilience of service systems. And once the pandemic's over, please come back and visit me at the Ogden Almaden Research Center. And with that, I'm going to end it and ask if there's any questions. Thanks for listening.